So welcome to this episode of Menopause Conversations. For those of you that follow the channel regularly, you will notice that we have a familiar face back on. So I'd love to welcome my wonderful colleague and friend, Diane Danzebrink. Morning, Diane. How are you?
Good morning, lovely. I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Yes, I'm very good, thank you. I always said I'm not a massive fan of Mondays because it's always admin day, but today is different because I get to start by having a great conversation. And today is really, really important because I think it's a less than 100 days, working days, until World Menopause Day, Diane,
Mm-hmm.
and World Menopause Month. And we know what tends to happen then. There's a whole load of menopause washing, as we call it, where
Yep.
everyone comes out and tells us all the things they're doing on that one day or that 1 month, where in fact, actually, people like Diane have been talking about menopause as a grassroots campaigner for a very, very long time. And so I wanted to take the opportunity to actually introduce her to my collective, my following, and to people on LinkedIn and on Instagram that maybe don't know the face behind the rigorous campaign of menopausesupport.co.uk. And what better way to do it than to talk about Diane's beautifully published book in all my favourite colours. Thanks for matching your t-shirt, by the way, for today's podcast. I don't know if that's subliminal, but I'm a huge fan of Diane's book, and I felt very, very privileged when you asked if myself, along with lots of other people, whether we would review your book. It honestly was such a joyous process to do. So let's get into it, Diane Danzebrink. This is your life. Let's introduce you to people. I mean, how is it that in 2024 you find yourself as someone who really is a figurehead in the menopause space with a book talking about making menopause matter in the present tense? Tell us how you've arrived here.
So in 2012, I had to have surgery quite quickly because it was thought that I had ovarian cancer. So I very briefly, I had my surgery. I left the hospital with no information about being in surgical menopause. I had had both my ovaries, my womb, my cervix, my fallopian tubes removed. And all I knew was that I wouldn't have any more periods. And I was simply told, if you feel that you need to, go and see your GP in a few weeks. I was never given a follow-up appointment with anybody at the hospital, which is shocking in itself. For the first few weeks, I was very fortunate in a way because I was told that I should take 6 weeks of rest, really, because I'd had major abdominal surgery. The first two of those weeks happened to coincide with the London Olympics. So I sat on the sofa watching the London Olympics for 2 weeks, had a few hot flushes, but actually sort of thought, oh, this is okay. For probably the first 3 months after my surgery, in which time I did see a GP because I had to have stitches removed. For the first 3 months, I thought I was doing okay. I paid to see a London women's health specialist nutritionist because I thought, what can I do to support me now that I've had this major surgery, etc. And she prescribed me with 7 pots of different vitamins and minerals. I absolutely hate taking any kind of tablet or capsule. So it wasn't great, but I was rigorous and made sure that I took them every day. And she promised me that would, that would sort things basically for me, any symptoms that I was going to experience and help me with my recovery from surgery. I would say month 4, things started to change. And at some point during month 4, I metaphorically fell off of a cliff in terms of my mental health. So I started to develop severe anxiety. And cutting a long story short, over a period of weeks and months, that turned into not wanting to leave the house, not wanting to have anybody to the house, other than my mum, not wanting to answer the telephone. And it got to the point where I wouldn't leave the house to walk my dogs, and I wouldn't even answer the telephone because my irrational brain had got to, sorry, I wouldn't even open post because my irrational brain had got to the point where my thought process was that any incoming information was going to be negative, and essentially it meant that I felt like I was going mad. My husband and my mother tried to encourage me to go and see a GP, but I was terrified because I thought I was going mad. And I thought it would be one of two things. I would either be on a lifetime of medication or that I would be admitted to a mental health unit. And both of those things terrified me. Um, my husband became incredibly worried about my mental health, and as often as possible would ask my mum to come and stay with me. Obviously, I'd stopped working. I couldn't focus on anything, which was a financial stress added to everything else because I'm self-employed. Um, and I think it was sort of probably about month 6 or 7 that I remember waking up one day from another horrible, horrible night. I would often have panic attacks during the night, looking out of the window and thinking, I can't do this anymore. And it was later that day that I came incredibly close to taking my own life. And thankfully, a little dog called Henry saved it. Um, and my husband took control of the situation without me knowing, contacted our GP practice, insisted on an appointment that day. And I was very fortunate because a GP stayed behind to see me that day. And she was a GP who understood surgical menopause. And she spoke to me about what had happened to me and why it had happened to me, and talked to me about HRT. And I was very scared because I'd heard all the scary things in the last 20 years about HRT, seen those headlines. And she then took the time to explain all the latest factual evidence based information and explain to me why I should have had HRT at the point of my surgery, and encouraged me to take it. And I started using HRT patches that day. And it wasn't a miracle, and it didn't work overnight. It took a few weeks, but slowly but surely, the dark, scary world that I was living in didn't feel quite so dark and scary anymore. And it was at that point that I thought to myself, I wonder if it's just me. I wonder if I'm the only person that this has ever happened to, or if there are other people out there struggling. So at the time, it was 2013. It wasn't TikTok and Instagram.
No.
It was forums. So I started to turn to some of those forums, and I was just horrified. I kept seeing the same things coming up time and time again. I feel like I'm going mad. I don't know who I am anymore. I feel so alone. I'm struggling at work. I'm struggling in my relationship. And on one particular day, I remember where I was standing, and I remember turning round and, in quite a grumpy voice, my poor husband, it wasn't his fault, saying, how the hell can this be right? We're half of the population, and yet there is so much needless suffering going on out there. If I ever feel like me again, I'm going to make damn sure I do something to change it. And that ultimately is where starting menopause support came from, and then the Make Menopause Matter campaign, and now coming up for a decade of activism and supporting others and trying to make national change.
Yeah, amazing. And I am really sure people listening to that will see themselves in part in some of that story, won't they?
Mm-hmm.
And in my review of your book, that's what I felt. I definitely felt you took us on a journey, but one where we were included. And we could see ourselves in it, because that's really powerful. It's when we don't see ourselves and we can't relate to things, That's the really destructive thing, or part
Yeah,
of the destruction I feel when I speak to people, or when I'm supporting people, and when we talk about your book, because you're right, 50% of the world population, what, just meant to keep calm and carry on. um
mm,
I don't think so. And so much progress has been made since you sort of turned your pain into your power. I see a lot of people doing that. And I like it, because I think it's such a good use, because your pain can consume you otherwise, but
yeah,
turning it into something powerful for the benefit of others, that it just almost doesn't get any better than that. And so let's get in and then talk. So thank you so much for sharing, because and sometimes, do you find this, Diane? I find this, you sort of forget about your story a little bit, because you're
yeah,
so busy doing and
yeah,
getting on with it. Someone asked me last week, and they went, so have what was your menopause like? And you sort of
mm,
forget, because you're so busy just doing your introduction and cracking on with it. It's like,
yeah,
actually, yes, 16 years of really difficult perimenopause. But actually, I do see it as a positive, because without that, I wouldn't be here. I probably would have
yes,
been back doing something else, probably
yeah.
less purposeful, less fulfilling. But let's talk about the book then. So the book, Making Menopause Matter, the essential guide of what you need to know and why. Why do we need to know, Diane? Why do we need to know?
Well, I think it really goes back to some key issues, lovely. So personal health and well-being for a start. So as you said, half the world population is just over 8 billion people. So approximately half of those are going to experience menopause directly. The other half will experience it indirectly, because there's nobody alive on the planet that isn't going to know or love somebody that goes on to experience menopause. It might
Absolutely.
not be a partner, but it might be a friend, a family member, a colleague. So everybody is going to know somebody. So that's number one. Two, why do we need to know? Well, for those who are going to experience it directly, they need to know so that they can make informed choices when menopause comes along. Now, that might be a natural menopause, a surgical menopause, a medically induced menopause, or a premature menopause. All of those people should have that information prior to menopause coming along, at least a basic understanding, if nothing else. And the other half need that too, so that they can support. So, you know, and then if we look at the knock on effects of not knowing, well, we think about things like people feeling that they have no choice but to step away from their careers, people taking a sideways move in their career where actually they could perhaps be moving up but don't feel that they maybe have the confidence to be able to do that, or they're struggling cognitively. We also have to think about relationships. We know that we see a rise in the breakdown of relationships in couples in their 40s. Perimenopause for many will begin in their early 40s. Now, can I say categorically that I have good research that I can point you in the direction of? No, I don't, because we just don't have that research. But anecdotally, over the last 9 coming up for 10 years, I have spoken to and counselled many, many, many women and men who say, actually, this is having an effect on our relationship. So we also have to think about wider family, the effect that that has on wider families, on children, on other family relationships, whether it's with siblings, with parents, etc. And then we also have to think about the fact that, again, I can't point you to research, but we also have to think about the fact that when we see suicide figures, not just in the UK, but I have certainly looked at figures in Australia, I've looked at figures in the States, we see that there is a rise. In the UK, it's generally between the ages of 45 and 54 in females. Now, I've been criticised for raising that as an issue, but I'm guessing that those who choose to criticise have not been in the unenviable position that I've been in over the last 12 months of speaking to 4 men who have lost their wives, they feel as a direct consequence of menopause. So criticize all you like, but I will keep talking about it. And because if it helps to save one life, the criticism really will just go straight over my head. It's more important than worrying about what people are saying. Essentially, we need to be talking about this. And as you know, I'm a trustee of the MREF, Menopause Research and Education Fund, as well as founding Menopause Support. And that is one of the pieces of research that I would really like to see happen, certainly early. Obviously, all that's gonna depend on funding, but
Yeah.
that's one of the pieces of research that I desperately feel at a national level that we need to do.
Absolutely. And I can also say, Diane, that that is my experience when we do our awareness sessions. I mean, there have been very, very tragic stories, and actually not of women taking their lives, but also men taking their lives as a consequence of menopause.
Yep.
So it's real, but unless we get the data, we don't know to what extent. And so if there
Yep.
isn't a national interest, just because I heard something the other day, just because we don't have the data doesn't mean it isn't a problem.
Exactly that. Yep.
So you're absolutely right. So
Yep.
yes, I mean, I know why we needed this book. I know why we need to keep talking about it. Tell people, if we still live in times of financial hardship, but if people are going to invest in themselves and invest in their loved ones, why this book? And not, because as we know, it's a big industry now, menopause. But actually, I know why
I've
I
written a
like.
chapter all about that.
Yes, there is a chapter all about that. So tell us why this book is different. In because having written it, you would have decided how you wanted it to look
Yeah.
and feel for people.
Yeah. So I was actually approached by the publisher in 2020 to write a book about menopause. And for many different reasons, it I didn't really have the structure that well, first of all, the reason that I didn't do it because I didn't have the time, and I wanted to be able to have so running menopause support full time and writing a book. I would say anybody who's ever considering writing a book and you have a full time job, stop and think about that. Because if you're going to do it, I would really recommend, obviously debut author. I don't have lots of experience, but if I've got one piece of advice to pass on, it's if you are approached to write a book, or in fact, you're thinking of self publishing, is carve yourself out a chunk of time, because I wrote this book weekends and evenings, and I think I took 2 weeks off to be able to focus on things that sort of I was struggling to get right. So this book really has taken up every weekend and evening of probably about a year.
Wow.
So I literally did. I mean, my poor husband,
Was
every
a
time he
saint.
looked at me, I was writing, and to be honest, it was exhausting, because doing that and running menopause support and the Make Menopause Matter campaign during the day, and like anybody who has a full-time job, you're really focused on what you're doing, and then you have to sort of eat and then refocus and think, okay, I need to do this. But so originally approached in 2020, but just A, didn't have the time, and B, it was COVID. Um, the world was a different place. There were an awful lot of people that needed support during that time, probably more than ever. Um, so this probably didn't really start in earnest until sort of the back end of 22, beginning of 23. I had an outline of what I wanted to do, And I always knew by that time, you know, we had lots and lots of menopause books. But I always knew that what I wanted to do was to write a very honest guide to navigating the menopause landscape. So there's lots of books out there about symptoms and how to manage them, etc. But I really wanted to talk more widely about the potential effects of menopause on all our lives. Um, I wanted to share some of my experience. I wanted to share the experiences of others, and in other places around the world, so that people could get an idea of what it might be like to try to navigate menopause in Nepal or Nigeria. I would love to have done something, you know, for every kind of country around the world, but there wasn't enough space. But I wanted it basically to be a book that absolutely anybody, probably from the age of sort of 13 to 113, could pick up and get something out of. But I wanted it to be, yeah, I wanted it to be very honest, because I think, you know, sort of there are a lot of things that have changed in the menopause landscape. Um, there are some age old issues which people struggle to get the right help and support for. They struggle to know even where to head to get the right help and support. We have seen an enormous um, commodification of the menopause landscape. It's become a very commercialized and, I would say, quite a competitive landscape in some places. We've seen a mushrooming of the private medical menopause industry, and obviously that's something that a lot of people simply don't have access to. But I wanted it to be something that, whether you are going to experience menopause yourself or you're going to be trying to support somebody else, whether that is your partner, a friend or family member, or a colleague, I wanted you to be able to pick it up and take something out of it. But I also wanted people to be able to think about, whoever they are, maybe taking a moment to review their own lives too, and whether or not they genuinely are looking after themselves. So, am I employing any self care in my life? Are there simple things that I can do? So, I've tried to give some of those tips. And I also wanted to look at, as well as relationships and the workplace, I also wanted to look at what comes next.
Mm.
What about menopause and beyond? Because, you know, there are millions of women around the world who are in what I guess clinicians call post-menopause. Um, and I don't think we hear very much about that. I don't think it's talked about very much. And I've certainly had the privilege of working with a lot of amazing postmenopausal women who've gone on to do fabulous things. That might be in their local community, it might be more widely, it might be with their careers, it might be with their new passions and projects. But I don't think that that's something that we hear very much about.
I agree massively, massively. And in terms of what you said, writing an honest account, I think that's what it feels like. It feels like a series of conversations and chats, which I love, because it's got that pick up, put down, pick up, put down. And that to me is the sign of a great book. You don't have to read it all in one go. You can
Mm,
take little snippets. But chapter 5, which you sort of mentioned there, which is optimizing self-care,
mm,
because actually your background is as a therapist, isn't it?
yeah,
And
yeah,
so what's really nice in here, you've got things like simple breathing practice, relieving stress. I mean, for me, that is the first topic that we always talk about, is
yeah,
how are you managing your stress? You know, HRT and options are usually the last thing we're talking about, because as we know, you know, if you can improve your sleep, if you can improve your nutrition, those wheels will turn more smoothly if you choose to add something else in. So what I love is, even look after your liver. Most people like go, what are you talking about? When you sort of liver, I don't eat liver. No, your liver. Because it's been,
Yeah.
when people understand, it's like most things, isn't it? um I read a lot of parenting books
Right.
because I want to be, the best version of parenting that I can be. So I'm
Yeah.
always willing to learn. And I sort of think it's a very similar concept. If we want to be around for a long time, if we want to enjoy our longevity and be well in older age, actually we need to take that by that bull by the horns, as it were. And what I really liked is how you then lent into in the book. Yeah, you've done stuff for yourself, but actually there is a moment when you maybe do need to go and see the doctor. And first of all, you give a lot of good advice about how you can make that step. But
Hmm.
actually, one thing that I would like to lean into about the book is, which I think is really powerful, is when the doctor doesn't know best.
Mm.
What was your motivation for writing that chapter?
So I think it's important to say that I am very proud to say that I have several, probably more than several friends who are doctors, and I know them to be passionate, caring, wonderful people. Um, I have had, sort of consultations with and treatment from wonderful, caring doctors. I have also had treatment from doctors who were ignorant of what I was trying to bring to their attention. And, sort of just to give you an example, when I had my surgery, I was diagnosed so at 44, I was diagnosed for the first time with having lived with grade 4 endometriosis, adenomyosis, and a huge fibroid, as well as having complex cysts on both my ovaries. Now, that adenomyosis and endometriosis hadn't just turned up. For 20 plus years previously, I had booked my holidays around my periods. I had missed out on all kinds of social events because of my periods. I very often wouldn't be able to ride my horse because of either the abdominal pain that I was experiencing or the fear that I was going to flood through my riding clothes onto my saddle while I was riding. Um, I'll be honest, it's only on a handful of occasions that I had tried to raise that with GPs because I'd got used to being told it's just heavy periods, it's normal. Um, I actually had abdominal surgery in my 20s after a very, very heavy fall um, from a flighty thoroughbred. Um, and I after that, on the night of that fall, I woke up with dreadful, dreadful abdominal pains and was backwards and forwards to the doctors several times over a period of weeks. And on one occasion, saw a male doctor who told me I was being hysterical and that it was just normal period pain. Several weeks later, I was in intensive care with them telling my husband that I might not survive the night. Um, so uh, my reason for writing when the doctor doesn't know best is because it's not just my experience. I talk about the experience of my mother in the book. And also over the last, as I say, 9 coming up 10 years, I've spoken to too many people who have told me that they have tried to raise their pain, and it is generally pain.
Mm.
They've tried to raise their pain with their doctor, and their doctor has kind of brushed them away and told them that it's, very often it's normal period pain. It's normal to have heavy periods. No, neither of those things are normal. Um, Also, things like, we hear, thankfully now, we hear more about things like PMDD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, people who've been struggling for a long time who've been told, oh, well, it's just PMS. Well, I would say nothing is just PMS, because if it's affecting your quality of life, then, sort of you should be listened to. But I think it's important for us to remember that, when a medical health professional is ignorant, and what I mean by that is, I'm not being derogatory there, I mean, sort of the dictionary definition of the term, when they don't know,
Yes.
I think what we have to do is we have to think, okay, why don't they know?
Yeah.
So we have to consider where the fault really lies. And the fault doesn't lie with the practitioner, the fault lies with those that teach them, because a craftsman is only as good as his tools. And any professional is only as good as their education. So, what we have to think about is, how do we ensure that our medical health professionals, they can't be experts in everything. It's not possible, particularly our GPs, they are
Yes.
generalists. But I think there has been, well, I don't think, I know there has been a real lack of focus on female health generally, that's well documented, and female gynecological health specifically, and female mental health. And none of those things happen in isolation. Kind of, we are one being, it's all connected. So I think what we need to be focusing on is, how do we ensure that our medical health professionals of the future can recognize endometriosis, might not recognize adenomyosis, but they say, do you know what, I'm going to refer you.
Yes.
Might not know how to manage PMDD, but can recognize that that individual needs to be referred to a specialist. So that's the ignorance part of it. And then I'm really sad to say that there are occasions when both me personally and some of the people that I've spoken to have also encountered arrogance. And I'm not just talking about patients, I'm also talking about junior doctors in training who I've spoken to, who have told me about some of the experiences that they have had with consultants. We also only have to look at things like the research from the British Medical Association, which surveyed female doctors about their own menopause experience. And those menopause doctors, many of them said they didn't recognise their own symptoms.
No.
Now, if they don't recognise their own symptoms, they're not recognising them in their patients. And equally worrying was what they said about the way that they were treated by their own colleagues. And many of them felt that they couldn't raise menopause as an issue because of the way that they would be spoken to, that they would be told that they just needed to get on with it. Some of the comments that they reported were far more derogatory than that. And again, if that's the way that these health professionals are talking to their health professional colleagues, what are they thinking and saying to their patients? Now, it's really important to recognise that in the last few years, we have seen an incredible interest from GPs about menopause. Many of them have taken the time, and actually a lot of them have paid their own money to do some CPD in menopause, which is brilliant.
Yeah.
But that never should be the case. That should be a mandatory piece of education. The issue has been raised nationally, I would say internationally now. We're seeing a movement starting in the States, in Australia, in New Zealand, in Ireland. It's brilliant to see that there are activists now in India, in Pakistan, in Nepal, in South Africa, in lots of other African countries. Pretty much all around the world. They might be little pockets, but there are little pockets. Japan,
Sri Lanka's even got a menopause association, which
it's
I'm
just
thrilled about.
but I think even more important than that is the sort of the grassroots community that is springing up all over the world with people
Mm,
saying, well, hang on a minute, we need to talk about this too.
yes.
So I think what we need to do is, rather than look back and go, oh, well, we didn't do it properly in the past. Well, no, we didn't. But what we need to do is we need to say, okay, there are simple things we could do here. We could provide a short mandatory module to all of our frontline healthcare professionals to help them to update their knowledge, which will help their patients. Because ultimately, Amantha, what we've done historically is not only have we done a huge disservice to women, but we've done an enormous disservice to our healthcare professionals by not giving them the right information.
Oh, it's so powerful, and I think this is what I think this is the chapter that almost helps people put a bit of fire in their own bellies, which is to advocate for themselves.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
always say to people, it's about you being confident enough to advocate for yourself. And when you
yeah,
do, most often there's very little pushback because you will probably know more about the topic than the person sat in front of you. And even about gynecologists, I went and saw a gynecologist last year, and I have to say I was
yeah,
massively disappointed because, again, there's that assumption that we think, well, gynecologists, that's their area of expertise. Well, it is if they're interested in it, and you sort of lean into that in the chapter as well. I mean, you're right, all of the things, and the Make Menopause Matter campaign in some way has already gone a long way to addressing that, with junior doctors, medical students being taught about the topic more than a cursory 2 hours. That they're actually really taken through it, so that we don't have those hushed whispers that I still get at my doctor's surgery, which is, I don't really know about that.
yeah.
Like, 16 years later,
And
you're still,
that's
and you're
so
16.
unfair, isn't
Yes,
it? That's
yes.
so unfair on the doctor to have to whisper to the patient, "I'm really sorry, but I don't really know about that." I mean,
Yeah.
that must be awful for them to have to do.
Oh, yes. And my doctor is very apologetic. So when I say things like, can you write a letter to the CCG? They'll say things like, if you write the letter, Amantha, we'll support you. It's almost like the patient power is a
Yeah,
thing. You
yeah,
just got to you got to push the door, because actually the door will open 9 times
yeah.
out of 10. Sometimes it won't.
I think the other thing, and again, I do mention it in the book, I think the other thing that we have to remember is that for many healthcare professionals, in fact, many employees, the NHS is a difficult place to be
Yes.
because of funding, because of the number of patients, etc. It is under a huge amount of pressure. And I can remember, several years ago, counselling burnt out doctors
Yeah.
who were absolutely desperate to continue on because they didn't want to let down their colleagues and they didn't want to let down their patients, but they were absolutely burnt out. So we really need to look at, how do we support this organisation that is supposed to be there free at the point of need for anybody who needs it? How do we do that in a way that is going to allow staff to stay and not burn them out?
Because a lot of them will be
That's
going through menopause themselves, won't they? Won't
Yep,
they? And if they're suddenly reducing their hours, well, then it's even harder to get to see that one doctor who's probably female, who's got an interest in women's health. So you're right, we
yeah.
do
I
need to.
think I think the last survey that and this was this was an NHS survey. I think the last survey that I saw was that 73% of NHS staff are women, and the average age of them is 43. That's
That
a
tells you everything you
disaster
need to
waiting to
know.
happen, isn't it?
And the NHS would pride itself, because I think it was about a year ago, wasn't it, that them saying that they've got a menopause policy, which is inclusive, and it's got reasonable supports and reasonable adjustments. And I think most people came out and went, well, if I'm a nurse, I don't think it really does support me. Or if I'm a junior doctor, I don't think it really does support me, because it was very specific to workplaces. But the NHS is complex, isn't it? Policy is meaningless unless it serves the people for which it's provided.
Exactly, lovely. I think we both know, don't we, from our work with businesses and organizations that, there's a couple of things about policy. One is it can be used as a tick box exercise where there's no culture that underpins the support that it says that it offers. And two, a single policy will never be able to cover every role within the NHS or in many other organisations because
No.
those roles are so diverse.
Yeah, you need a policy for every different type of job function, and therefore, like you say, the culture is so important. So can I just lean then into what feels like a natural progression for me, which is I said to you earlier I was going to call it the politics of menopause, because
Yes.
you know here you are, and by the way, let's not forget that milestone that was achieved in the week that your book was published, and the 200,000 signatures from everyday people going about their busy lives who signed that, calling for a greater focus nationally on
Yeah.
menopause. So let's talk about the politics of menopause. How much does politics uh, have to do with this topic in terms of how far we go and how quickly we can go with it?
So, in terms of politics, I learned very quickly when I launched the campaign back in 2018. I launched it in Westminster with cross party support, which is, it's a great thing to be able to say,
Yeah.
but there have been certainly since 2018, and the more press that menopause gets, the more politicians want to talk about it because, it's a good opportunity. But I often say when I speak to people, if all the words turned into actions, we'd all have retired and gone off to do something else by now, because we see meetings about meetings, we see reports, and then we see a report very similar to the last report. We've had a big piece of work in the women's health strategy, which on paper is a fabulous thing. But then we have to think about, okay, so how is that strategy going to be implemented? And I feel absolutely sure that the people who are involved in that, sort of are dedicated to making that happen. But we're going to need an awful lot of money to make that women's health strategy happen. Women's health hubs for a start. 25 million across 42 ICBs in England gives them about £595,000 each. That's a one-off payment. That's not recurring. That's not just for menopause. That's for all women's health. It'll last about 3 minutes.
And haven't some been used to pay off debts
So
from
it's
the
not been ring fenced.
it's not been ring fenced, so actually
No,
quite a lot of that money's already gone to pay off debts
it's
that
not
already
been ring
exist.
fenced. So what that leaves is that leaves lots of passionate clinicians around the country who would love to see a women's health hub because they totally get the ethos and the sense of having a women's health hub. But these things have to be paid for.
Mm.
So we are going to have to see enormous investment. Now, both the sitting government and the main opposition have had an awful lot to say about menopause in the last 5 years. But as we know, if you're in opposition, it's very easy to say words because you can't really do anything. So you can be as ambitious as you like in opposition. And for the government, they've said an awful lot, but let's be honest, what have we really seen on the ground? For those people, sort of who are reliant, specifically those who are reliant on the NHS. What have we really seen? We still have, I believe it's 12 counties in England alone that don't have an NHS specialist menopause clinic.
Yeah. I believe one of those counties
Now,
is mine,
you know,
Devon.
in 5 years, even if we're talking about, sort of since the campaign, in 5 years, that really should have been tackled. But of course, the thing is, you have huge amounts of stakeholders involved here. So you have national government. National government, I was told pretty much in my first meeting in Westminster, government cannot mandatory training for all GPs in menopause. It is not within the government's will or power. No, not will, that's not fair. It's not within the government's power to do that. So they cannot mandate that. They have to work with the relevant stakeholders to encourage that. Now, what we have seen good improvement in, particularly with Helen being the workplace champion, is we've seen a lot of work go on with menopause in the workplace, which is great. We've got the government's help to grow pages on the website, which I really feel more people should be made aware of. There needs to be a campaign around that because there are some really good, simple resources there. We've seen the BSI guidance, which is absolutely fabulous. So there's been a lot of good work done there. A lot of it coming directly from the DWP. So that's been really positive. However, if we tackle the healthcare issues, a lot of those workplace issues actually wouldn't arise.
Yeah.
Because if people could get the right help and support when they first go and see their GP or their practice nurse, the workplace issues wouldn't happen. Now, that's not to say that we don't need guidance in the workplace. We absolutely do need guidance. It's really important. But we have to, it's a bit kind of chicken and egg.
Mm.
Well, let's get let's get the basics right, and then a lot of these other things wouldn't be happening anyway. So I think, we see focus groups, we see reports, we see MPs and ministers giving interviews and talking about these things. For me, talking to grassroots community, a lot of them don't really feel that much has changed in terms of particularly healthcare. I think that's, for me, that ultimately is the key. Now, whether you choose HRT or you don't is absolutely should be a personal choice, but you should also be made aware that there are other options available to you. And a lot of people are not aware that there are any other options. As I say, in 12 counties in the country, people don't have direct access to a secondary care professional. So, particularly those with a complex medical history, really vital that they have that access. And there are lots of little pockets around the country where there are brilliant secondary care practitioners who are setting up, like independently, they're setting up Zoom calls for their primary care colleagues so that they can ask them questions. And there are all sorts of things going on, but none of this should have to happen because this should be centrally funded by government and the NHS.
Yeah. Yes, touche to all of that. Because the reality is, if you are a person, let's say, who doesn't work for a large organization, and most of the people in the United Kingdom are employed by small businesses, which is
SMEs, yeah.
SMEs, which is less than 250 people. So the reality is you may not have an EAP program. It could be just you and your boss, or maybe you and a few colleagues, So,
Yeah.
that person then has to take time off work. If you don't live where there's a centre, that involves travel, more expense, more financial hardship. Any reduction in your hours is going to impact your state pension, your national
Yep.
insurance contribution. So it's almost like there's a massive education piece for people to understand as a patient, but employers as well, because we're hemorrhaging the talent from workplaces. I definitely couldn't have gone back to work, which is why I set up my own business, which sort of leans into
Yeah.
that optimistic postmenopausal piece. But But
Yeah.
the reality is, it then drives something else, which I want to talk about, which is this, billion-pound dollar business, which is the menopause space, which sometimes for me feels like I swimming with sharks, quite honestly.
Hmm.
It's like everyone is trying to capitalize because the NHS and the national system doesn't support us. It's like, brilliant. Let's have a whole aisle dedicated to menopause products. Let's offer 15-minute consultations. I said to someone the other day, by a health food brand, I said, it takes most people 15 minutes just to either feel like they've finished their story,
Regulate their breathing.
take their breathing, stop crying, stop feeling overwhelmed. 15 minutes is nothing. You need to,
No.
15 minutes is just a settling in period for
Yeah.
people. And it
Yeah.
may be, multiple sessions are required. So I think there's a
Yeah.
naivety there. But I mean, only say as much as you want, Diane. But what are your thoughts about the capitalization and monetization of menopause? I
Well,
mean,
I'm very happy, lovely, to talk about it because I've written it down in black and white so people
yeah,
can
okay.
go
So
and read it.
go for it then. Because
I don't
it's a
like
great
it.
chapter. It's a great chapter.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I don't like it. Sort of, I know that there are many people who feel exactly the same because I see and speak and read about what they think. Essentially, when you see, um, I'm just trying to find
Can I
my
get
own
the three
chapter, lovely.
headlines? Can I get the three headlines, which is in
Yeah, go
chapter
on.
10? Here are just three recent headlines in the media. Is it time to jump on the menopause bandwagon? Question mark. Menopause is a $600 billion opportunity, and menopause no longer a taboo, and marketeers have noticed. Oh, and don't get me started on the pink tick thing.
So for me, I don't like the idea that people are being targeted, and it would appear to me that the longer this goes on, the more menopause products are coming to the market. And, clearly for brands, for advertisers, for marketers, they're not silly. I mean, I think any of us who have spoken up about improving menopause care and support for the right reasons feel that we do take a little bit of responsibility for creating this awareness, because 10 years ago it wasn't like this.
No.
And yet, for all of us who really want to see things change for everybody for the right reasons, this leaves a really nasty taste in our mouths. That, sort of, you're seeing all kinds of random products pop up with the word menopause in front of them. And it just seems that, well, if I throw menopause in front of it, well, that's a new audience for me. Um, it's yeah, and I think the other thing is, kind of the space generally has, I mean, it's just erupted. Things are popping up on a daily basis. And, you will often see glossy advertising for these things quite often. Not always, but quite often you'll see famous faces fronting these brands. And I am by nature, I guess, a skeptic. So I always say to people, whatever service, because we're not just talking about products, there's all kinds of menopause services popping up on a regular basis. Whatever service or product you are considering, please do your due diligence. If it's a service, find out, does that individual really have the experience? Because that's key. Do they have the experience and the integrity to really be able to help you? Or have they just seen it as an opportunity? Have they
Can,
just rebranded themselves?
can I say, and that is something I feel really, really passionately about,
Mm.
in that only the other week, you and I probably, between us, probably have nearly 50 years experience of either
Mm.
coaching people in therapy.
Mm.
Um, you can qualify as a menopause coach for £25.
Oh,
I saw an advert on
did
Instagram,
you see
Diane,
the online thing? Yeah, yeah,
and I was just like, oh my, this is so dangerous. It is
yeah,
so unbelievably dangerous.
yeah.
And not taking away anything from people's experience, but your experience doesn't make you qualified to coach other people. You actually
No,
need to have either a coaching qualification, you need to have, like you're saying, those credentials, that, you
yeah.
know, that integrity piece. I am so worried. I can't tell you. When I saw that, I was just like, is it April Fool's Day again or something? Because, but that's what I'm seeing. People are recognizing that menopause suffering is something that people can capitalize on, and it's dangerous.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely lovely. So I think in terms of, sort of seeking out support from an individual or an organization, do your homework. How long
Yes.
have they been around? Do they have that experience? Do they have the integrity to be able to really help you? I've certainly had experiences where I've spoken to people who, some of them have spent quite significant amounts of money and not only have been given poor advice, but on some occasions, I would say detrimental advice.
Yes.
And that really, really worries me. And then we have the products. So just remember, for most of the products, if you've seen a survey or if you've seen research, it's probably been done by the brand that are selling it to you anyway. It's not independent. And that also kind of, for me, feeds into the socio-economics of menopause, because we have to remember that the vast majority of individuals simply don't have particularly in the current financial landscape, simply don't have the money in the bank to be able to look at all of these services and products springing up. So not only are they feeling disenfranchised in terms of being able to get the right help and support, perhaps from their first line, which might be their doctor or practice nurse, but then they're also feeling, well, I can't do any of this either. So there is a knock on effect to that. Um, yeah, I mean, Don't Believe the Hype was the perfect title for the chapter, because there is now so much hype around menopause. There is clearly a huge amount of money to be made, which, hence those headlines. And I think Don't Believe the Hype, I've sort of widened that out as well into, sort of how women historically have been viewed, how many have come to feel about themselves, about what a woman should be, who
Yes.
she should be, particularly as she ages. And it's really kind of encouraging people to step back and think about that, and think about, are you doing things that perhaps society or culture or the media are making you feel you should do, when actually that doesn't sit well with you, either in your gut or in your heart or wherever that might be. I think for, far too many centuries, women have felt pressurized. I talk about a survey that was done in there, which is really a
Yeah,
scary
the Dove
read.
survey, wasn't it? About, and low
Yeah,
body
it's a
confidence and image for
in over
hundreds of people.
60%.
Yeah.
It's a really scary thing to read, really worrying. And so I just say to people, sort of, I've got it in front of me. So before you rush to do anything that is being promoted at you that you've not thoroughly researched, or that is not 100% your choice, stop and ask yourself, why am I doing this? Is it because you truly want to? If it's because you feel you should conform to peer, partner, social, or media pressure, or unrealistic expectations, I urge you to consider the cost, not just to your pocket, but to your mental health and well-being, and the perpetuation of the social stereotypes about women and their bodies that so many have felt pressured into conforming to for too long. embracing the opportunity of menopause to take back control might just help you, your daughter, or your son look at things a little differently and may help to move the dial for every woman for the future.
Yes. Yes, because I can see my mum, my mum's 80, and I can see my mum having conformed to so many of those narratives about dye your hair because you don't want to look older. Aging is stylish, it's good to age. I'm aging, you're aging, which sort of springboards us lovely into this chapter, which is I read something quite recently that apparently, as you progress through menopause, your vocal cords change,
Yes.
and you get a deeper, more resonant, authoritative voice. I love that. My husband
Yeah.
doesn't love it. I'm sure he doesn't love it, but I love saying no when I want, and I love saying yes when I want.
When you want.
When I want, and
Not
I think
because you feel that you should.
should, could, or ought. No
Mm-hmm.
to any of those. And
Mm-hmm.
and maybe if we tell people, because that is, again, what comes through in the book for me is hope. And I love that. I think as long as, when we have hope, that is such a powerful thing to hold on
Yeah.
to. And it's when we don't have hope and we feel hopeless or hopelessness. I've definitely felt hopeless. And I think
Yeah.
it's probably quite hard for people to imagine that.
Yeah.
People often describe women as being strong and these stereotypes that we have to live up to. But I have definitely felt weaker, hopeless, a
Yeah.
former shadow of my present self. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not nice. And
No,
actually, I
it's a
think what the
horrible
book
place to
what
be.
what the book does and what you do so brilliantly is you invite people to have a different experience,
Hmm.
to build their knowledge, to build their self-esteem, to know that they can either advocate for themselves or others. So tell us what postmenopause could be like. What is it like from your perspective,
So,
Diane?
yeah, okay, lovely. So I say in the book that I have never felt, um, I've never felt better than I feel now. I've never felt healthier. I've never felt more confident than I do at this time in my life. And, sort of, I have certainly not, that has not always been my experience. But I have really come to embrace the power of postmenopause. And that's not because I did anybody's course. That's not because I read a book. That's not because I watched somebody on YouTube telling me how to do it. That's the benefit of that lived experience. And my experience is going to be different to yours, is going to be different to every other person who experiences menopause. But I think what it has taught me is that life is very precious. I am very blessed to be here to experience it because as we know so many don't get that opportunity, but also even with all of the difficulties that I experienced, that has all taught me something. It's taught me something about myself. um and not in a million years, Amantha, kind of back in 2012, not in a million years did I expect that I would have set up a social enterprise, a national campaign, written a book, been to parliament, all of the other things that I've done over the last 10 years. I never ever imagined myself being somebody who would be in the press or on TV. But because of the passion that I felt, and the injustice that was being meted out to billions of people around the world, that's what drove me to do that. And from somewhere, I found the courage to do that, but driven by the passion to make things different. So, but I've also learned how important self care is because it's certainly something that I've spoken to clients about for many years, but I feel that I have a much deeper understanding of self care now. So, I I used to be a people pleaser. There's no doubt about it. I absolutely did. And I think there are many, many people on the planet who would say similar. But now, in the kindest way, I find it very easy to say no, thank you.
Yes.
Because if it doesn't work for me, it's much better for me to say no, thank you, rather than to accept an invitation that I don't want.
Yeah.
Because time is precious. I don't want to be there.
No.
I would much rather be doing things that I do want to do, which make me happy.
Yes. Definitely. You can't pour from an empty cup. And,
You
you know,
absolutely can't, lovely.
and I think this is maybe, very spiritually, soulfully, this is what
Mm,
actually menopause gives us. It gives us that
hmm
chance to reset, take
hmm
stock of things, let go of what no longer serves us, embrace the things that we've been putting off for decades, possibly, and actually to be true to ourselves and our own
Yeah,
personal values.
yeah.
I love that. And I definitely resonate with the whole people pleasing thing. Where that comes from is almost irrelevant, but I think when you recognize it in yourself, you also recognize you have a choice. And
Yeah, yeah, absolutely lovely. And I think it's also about, I think for many of us, I think, kind of for a lot of us, part of our, one of our values and part of our moral code is to be kind to other people. I think what often gets forgotten is being kind to ourselves.
yeah,
And I think that's definitely something that I have sort of revisited. Um, the idea of nourishing yourself, and I don't just mean with food, I mean with
no,
experiences, and also really being able to appreciate who you are as an individual, celebrating. It might not be, you might not be sort of celebrating on Instagram or TikTok, and you might not be celebrating publicly, but privately celebrating what you have achieved. Because I think very often life moves very fast, and so we fly by. Or, I've certainly been guilty of that. We fly by all of those things and we don't think to ourselves, oh wow, that's amazing that I made that happen. So I think that's really important. So it's not just about being kind to others, it's about being kind to yourself as well, and also valuing the time that you have and using it wisely. And then
yeah,
hopefully that resonates with the people who are closest to you. And if you're lucky enough, like you and me, to have a little bit of a platform, hopefully you can share that with others and maybe get them to think about how they might do that for themselves.
yes, I love that. I really love that. That's a real call to action. um Yeah, because we often put ourselves so far down that list that we don't even see ourselves on it, do we?
Yeah, no, no.
And that's why I'll finish by saying then that on the back of Diane's book, and I think it so brilliantly describes what this is: part manifesto, a little memoir, plenty of self-help for sure, and ultimately a call to arms for society, public health, and individuals alike. Making menopause matter should be required reading for all, because actually, like every new day, we hope the sun's going to come up and we hope that it's going to go back down. We never know what we're going to get. So having something that prepares you for it, I really wish I'd had something like this instead of spending hours scrolling on my phone trying to connect dots. Honestly, so many notepads and diaries which are so depressing to read, desperately trying to connect things. This would have helped me. It really would have. It really would have helped me. So I know that you say if it helped just one person, it was all worthwhile. Don't take our words for it. Obviously, we're going to tell you it's brilliant, but go on places like Amazon and see the amazing reviews. Honestly, be blown away. And there'll be all sorts of people reviewing on there. We've got men, men reviewing a book about menopause.
That was a proper thrill to know that a man had read it. That was fantastic.
We've got medics, we've got people in this space, we've got people who are researching, we've got people that, it tells you what you need to know. So, there is no hype here. It's just happiness. So go get your copy. I've got mine. I intend to get it signed by the fabulous lady herself. But yeah, it's on all our reading lists as well. But what I would like to say is also Diane is actually responsible for this amazing booklet too. And this is with the help of a few of her special colleagues and friends. They've written a brilliant booklet, which again just takes some of the mystery out of it, so you can connect the dots for yourself and actually advocate for yourself. So, those two things together, it's such a good starting point, isn't it? Really and truly, all from one person. And what I'd like to say is, you're the epitome of taking your pain and turning it into your power. And I love that,
lovely.
because I think actually, if it's not a pain, turn your passion into your power. Because actually, this is a great time to do it. For women particularly, but
really
men,
is.
partners, our families, come on the journey with us. So, and someone said to me actually last week, what would you think? Someone said, I love that book. Do you think it would be all right to buy it for somebody else? How do you think that would go down? What do you think about that, Diane?
So I guess it depends on the relationship and who that person is. So I hope that whoever the lovely individual is that would consider buying it for somebody else, I hope that the recipient would receive that in the way that it's intended. It's obviously intended as, kind of a helpful guide. It's like, read this, you might see something of yourself here, and this might help you get the help and support you need. But ultimately, I think it depends. The other thing I would say, of course, is that not everybody will have the funds to buy the book. So I am aware that there are quite a lot of libraries who have stocked it. And if your library hasn't stocked it, if you request it, they will then stock it.
Great idea. And we asked the person, what's your relationship like with that person? And they actually said it was their mother-in-law, and they said they had a really good relationship. And they talked about it already quite a bit. And and she said she thought she would get it first, read it, and then pass it to her mother-in-law. So I think that's a great acknowledgement.
It's a brilliant idea
of the idea, isn't it? Read it yourself and then pass it on. Keep passing
Read
on the
it,
love.
share it. Yeah, absolutely
Or
lovely.
donate it to your local bookstore or your charity shop or whatever when you finish, or your library even, because they're always grateful for secondhand books. So Diane,
yes, my love,
for ages, but how can people know more about you? Obviously, we'll put all your socials in the show notes, but if people want to go and get a review, where is the book available, first of all?
Okay, so the book is available online at Amazon. It's also available at Waterstones, WH Smith's, and lots of other.
And Sheldon Press, who have published it. When you go on their website, you can literally connect into lots of other bookshops.
They've got all the details. Obviously, it's also available at your independent bookstore. I always want to big up independent bookstores because I love going into them and always make sure that I buy something, because I think if we don't support them, they won't be there. So if you're in the UK and Australia, it's already published. If you're in the States or Canada, it comes out during World Menopause Month in October.
Wow. And is there going to be a Kindle e-reader version? Do we know?
There is a Kindle version.
Brilliant.
There is a Kindle version already. Lovely.
Right. So that's good for people who want to access it in that way. So we're going to put all Diane's socials. Menopausesupport.co.uk is Diane's community interest company, who are responsible for amazing things like this. Go sign the petition. We need to.
Yeah, please do.
Please go sign that, because the work continues. It doesn't
absolutely
stop. We're still moving forward. But for now, Diane, thank you so much for your time. And again, just one last little question: what's your hope for the landscape of menopause? Let's say in the next 5 years? Obviously, we're in the year of a general election and stuff.
Yeah.
Where would you like to be?
So in the next 5 years, I would like to see significant funding allocated not just to frontline menopause care, but also I would like to see some significant funding allocated to menopause research in the UK. And around the world, I would like to see much more awareness generally, and I would like to see some of those of us in the UK who have been involved in this landscape for many years, and there are lots of people now getting more involved in sharing how they have got to the point that we are in the UK with those who are trying to do this around the world, so that we can make it a truly global community who will be able to say, in maybe 10 years' time, do you know what? We can look back and say that we really were the generation who made menopause matter.
And there we have it. Thank you so much, Diane.
My
Nothing,
pleasure. Thank
there's
you,
nothing much
lovely.
more to say. Thank you so much, and it's brilliant, and I can't wait to meet you myself in real life, IRL, which will be wonderful later this year.
Yes,
But
we'll
for
see
now,
you soon, my love.
yeah. But thank you so much, Diane.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.